faces. It's an intense group. Okay, so that's good. Well, maybe because of the size, you might not want me to talk as long. I don't know, because usually folks don't like to sit for very long.
Maybe we can take a break at one point, and then.
Well, the plan was for me to talk a bit, right, and then shut up, and then have folks ask questions.
Yeah.
So I like that format, and I think it's good to take a break. If you want to take a break in between that, maybe. Is that cool? All right. Hi. I'm going to move around a bit. I'm not going to stand here forever. And I might get a little loud. I'm from a loud family. I'm the quietest of a very loud family, which makes me still pretty loud. My name is Darrick Smith. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco in the Department of Leadership Studies in the School of Education. So my job, in addition to just teaching graduate students attaining their master's degrees and their doctoral degrees in educational leadership, is also helping to train principals for elementary and high schools in the United States. Also the other program is the higher education student affairs folks. So these are folks that are in student services at universities, are also in our program. I'll give you a little bit of background, and then we'll get into, I guess, the topic at hand. If you have any questions or comments, as I said before, we'll stop early enough and so you can ask them. And that is not to suggest that I have all the answers, because you might be able to answer them yourselves in this room. I'm a Sagittarius, so I'm born in December. When I'm 9 years old, I can date myself. I grew up in the golden era of hip hop. So if you know any history, I was 17 when Nas was 18. So that should tell you something. If you know who that is, you know who that is?
Yeah.
Okay, I like this group then. All right. I'm from Oakland, California. Okay, I was born and raised in that city. My mama was born in Arkansas. Came out with what we talk about in the States as the second great migration of African Americans coming from the South up to the North and to the West Coast to work at ports and etc. So my grandparents came out, and actually my grandmother came out, and then she passed away in a car accident. My mom was 14, so my mom was adopted by her aunt and uncle, and those were actually my grandparents. So I never lived to see my actual grandmother on my mom's side. But point is that they lived in West Oakland, which is probably is the oldest part of Oakland. And then my dad actually grew up in Alameda, which is a little island right next to Oakland with a very strong Portuguese and Italian population at the time. So, and so the Bay Area is a very diverse area. So I grew up in the next generation of a very diverse area. I should have had pictures of my friends, but I don't like showing pictures of me growing up. That kind of sucks, right? People tend to like it because it's really embarrassing for you, but I don't like to really show them all the time. But I'm from a very diverse background. Oakland, historically, since the 40s, was a very black city. Roughly around 60 to 65% African American. The United States is only 13% black. So when you have cities that are 65%, 50% black, it's considered a pretty black city. Which was of course it was fresh. I mean, I'm using a lot of 80s slang too. You might hear some 80s hip hop slang, you know, dope, fresh, you know. I won't use icy or saucy, but those are on my mind. So yeah, but it was really fresh, and but it was also the crack era, so it was very violent. Very, very violent. So, city of about 350,000, 380,000 people. In between 1983 and 1994, City of Oakland averaged about 138 homicides a year. Over 80% of those were black males. It's a lot. We tend to stay as a city, my beautiful city, usually stays in the top 10, top 5 of homicide rates in the United States, okay, just because it's just very violent. It was very violent. It was most violent when I was growing up. We had our highest homicide rate in my senior year of high school at 175 murders. And during that period of me in high school and about a year or so out of high school, I lost 3 of my friends to homicide as well. One of my classmates was the only murder I actually seen in my life, and that was in 10th grade when I was 15. Got shot with it was a pistol, but he died as they laid him on the hood of a car. But anyway, so high school and stuff was a trip, but that gives you a little bit of context of kind of the vantage point I'm coming from. Okay, it's a very grounded black political foundation that I have. Now, to be very clear, given my diverse upbringing, Oakland's very used to be very working class, labor oriented folks, mostly working at the ports and large factories, General Motors, a lot of working class folks. It's actually a very small city, 380,000 in the States is not a lot of people. I mean, considering we're next to San Francisco, which is about 800,000 people. Okay, San Jose down the way, about 1 million people. So Oakland's not that big. And then you had all these different constraints on where people could actually move and live back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. So you ended up having black folks moving into spaces as Italian and Portuguese and Irish folks were looking for places maybe to move out. You had folks living in Victorian houses, which usually have like 3 levels, and people actually living literally on top of each other. So that history of Oakland really is one in which folks that were like migrating in didn't really have a lot of spaces because they couldn't really move into what is now a very black and brown area in East Oakland. You couldn't really move into a lot of those spaces back in the 40s and 50s. So a lot of the folks had to literally move into these houses right on top of each other, and they were different ethnicities. And you only had for years 6 high schools in the whole city that people could attend. So you had 10,000 students at only 6 locations. Okay? So again, if you kind of put that into a mix, put the working class dynamic, the fact that folks had to live on top of each other, and the fact that folks often went to school with each other, you didn't have a lot of cross-racial beef for me growing up. So my friends were very diverse, Latino, Asian, black, and it was beautiful. And it was like that, I mean, for quite a while. I think it's still like that in a lot of ways. And so anyway, that's kind of how I grew up. My professional background, as opposed to just working at University of San Francisco, I'm happy to be there. I just got there. It's only my 2nd year at University of San Francisco. Before this, I actually taught in the community college system in the United States, in California. But I don't want to go backwards. Can I go forwards? Because it's kind of hard to go back like that. But so it includes doing youth development work. So I think one of the reasons why my perspective on black education is not necessarily unique, but I think it's an important one, is because my background is really in youth development work, right? Working with youth in the neighborhood, in the schools, and etc. So I started a program when I had gotten out of my undergraduate experience, which was crazy, because college is crazy. Like, college is really crazy. Like, the dumbest people you'll ever see are in college. And it's like nuts, right? Because everybody's walking around like, oh yeah, GPAs and papers, and look at that professor, and I go here. And it's like morons, like just everywhere, right? And so college is a trip that way because next to the morons is like the most brilliant people you might ever meet in your life. And so there's this real crazy dichotomy of like stupid as hell and like brilliant as all get out. So you're like, wow. But when you're from like, a working class community and you thinking like college is like, oh, all the smart people are there, it's really disappointing. Because like, you're hoping that this structure of oppression and stratification and inequity has some reason behind it. That, yeah, like my folks in the neighborhood, we ain't at college because, man, we ain't smart enough. And then you get up there and you're like, oh, there's something going on because you's a fool. And I can't believe you up in here. And they're like, oh, I went to a great school and, my family has a lot of money. And you're like, yeah, so that is kind of what this is about, ain't it? You know what I mean? Like family lineage and whether or not you can pay and all that stuff. And then some of the most brilliant cats are at home selling drugs, you know what I mean? Getting caught up by the police and you know, just going to work and would like to be in college. And they brilliant, and you knew they was brilliant. You know what I mean? And then you get to college, you're like, damn, I wish I could replace you with my partner back home. And particularly when you start getting into the the social dynamics of college and, you know, high rape rates, alcoholism, all these different things. And you're like, I'd rather my partner up here smoking hella weed replace you. Because you's a rapist. And I don't understand what this college thing is about if a serial rapist is able to go to school with me. Then this can't really be about intelligence and value, then it's about something else. So when I was at the University of California at Santa Cruz, which is a very white campus, 7,500 white undergraduates out of 10,000 undergraduates. Okay, there were 50 black males on that campus, right? Which is not that bad, you know, in North America. You know, it's a racist, you know, region. You know, I mean, it's not the only racist region. It's just so damn good at it, you know, and that you end up in a lot of colleges they ain't got no people of color in. As a matter of fact, we define prestige by the absence of color, you know. Like when you think about like high school and high school students, say, I want to go to that school. I want to go there. Why? Oh, I heard it's a good school, but you've never been there. I heard it was good though. Well, why do you want to go? Why do you think it's so good? I've seen the brochures. What did you see in the brochures? It's so different from other colleges. Oh, all the white people. That's right, right? Because as soon as you put people of color in a joint, it loses value off top, so people don't want to go, right? So I'm in this very prestigious school, UC Santa Cruz. You guys know University of California, like Cal, Berkeley, UCLA. All right, well, there's 8 other campuses in that system, and Santa Cruz is one of them. And so anyway, I'm there, and there's 50 black males, and we didn't get along when I got there, which was a trip because there's only 50. And I was like, there's only 50. Like, how can we have beef with each other when there's 50? You know what I mean? Like 5-0. And it was over some stuff. If you guys are from like, you know, any type of neighborhood, it doesn't have to be a neighborhood of color. That's a myth, right? That people of color are the oppressed ones, and all the white people are just doing great, which is not true. But if you're from a laboring, working class environment, you know, people getting beat, people have fun. There'd be a fight or somebody kissed the wrong person and shit just take off, you know what I mean? And it was a beef. And so the community of brothers was holding this beef. And so when I got there, I'm 17, I weigh 135 pounds, you feel me? I'm rocking up in the joint, I'm from Oakland, got a little flat top, feel me? Got, you know, I'm walking in the joint and brothers ain't talking. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And so anyway, we started an organization called the Black Men's Alliance and started bringing brothers together. And once we were able to do that, we was able to do some better work with the black women on campus. And after we was able to do that, we was able to do some better work with other groups on campus. The Jewish Student Association, to work with Japanese student orgs, to work with all that. It was dope. But what I found was very difficult was that we could get to the studying issues and we can get to some of the behavioral stuff, but not all of it. And so my frustration was that there's a certain level of consciousness that we couldn't change amongst each other as peers. So I wanted to develop something at the high school level that kind of got to the assholeness of students when they were in high school. Because usually if you're a prick in college, it's because you was allowed to be a prick in high school, typically. Okay? Not always. Some people find new prickness when they get to college. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, let me reinvent myself. I am now an asshole. You know what I mean? Which is really sad. It's really sad because nerds run the world and we should. I mean, no, just joking. I'm a big Japanese animation and sci-fi fan, so we talk about nerd stuff all the time. Yeah. The conferences, and I'm a professor. The conference I attend every year without fail is a conference called Fanime, which is a Japanese animation conference. And so my colleagues are like, "Oh, what are you doing?" It's like, "Man, I got Fanime this year." You know. They're like, "What is that?" You know. I'm like, "I can't really talk about it." You know, it's high level. You know what I mean? So anyway, I wanted to develop a program that got to some of the issues at the high school level. So I developed a program called Triumph. And this is all meaningful as to what I'm supposed to say in a second. So higher ed is basically a sophisticated enclosure, right? It's an enclosure that extracts knowledge out of communities, reframes it, and edits it into a language unfamiliar to those communities, and then charges those communities money to attend the college and be taken through the material, right? So research on poverty, right? Research on racism, research goes in, studies, take a survey, oh, that's deep, oh. Then I write it in a convoluted language that most of the global population wouldn't understand, okay? Then I put it in a journal that nobody really reads other than other academics and students who have paid to be in the institution. And so it becomes a place in which knowledge is closed away from the very people that actually generated it, right? And so I wanted to take knowledge and just take it down to the high school level, right? And I took it home to my alma mater, Oakland Tech High School, which is home to Huey P. Newton, which was one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, and my mama, which is most important. My mama graduated with Huey Newton in 1959 from that same school. Yeah, I have this is kind of embarrassing, but we have his picture, his high school graduation picture, right? This is like, one of the guys that was on the list for like the #1 threat to the United States, So we have his high school graduation picture, and he signed it to my mom. And you know what he said? Hope you have a nice summer, right? You know that one, right? Have a nice summer, right? So anyway, so I took it back to that school, and the point is that one of the points is for 10 years of my life, I taught critical theory, feminist theory, the history of globalization, and the history of social movements to grades 9 through 12, 5 times a day to 170 students for 10 years, okay? So there's books that I know by heart because I had to teach it 5 times a day for 10 years. You get what I'm saying? You're like, dang, you really know that book. It's not because I sat and just wanted to read the shit, you know what I mean? It's like, you got to do that when you're teaching. So anyway, I did that. After that, I became principal of a high school called June Jordan School for Equity in San Francisco. And we did some transformative, crazy stuff there. And then after that, I did policy work, which was horrible. No disrespect to my colleagues, of course, but it was horrible, okay? Policy work was really tough on me. Sit in a room, not a lot of black people, but they're all talking about black people. So that's the hard part, So after I did policy for the state, California community colleges for, I think I only did that for like 2.5 years. And then University of San Francisco thought, I don't know if they were on drugs or what, but they were like, we'd like for you to be our professor. And I thought that was crazy. So here I am, and I'm going to talk a little bit, and hopefully I won't put you to sleep. But we'll just talk about some things that I think you already know. And so consider it an affirmation. If it's things you don't know, I think you probably intuitively know it, even if it hasn't reached the front of your consciousness yet, right? So I was asked to talk a little bit about like black people in education, am I right? Or something around that. I'm not going to talk about black people only, although I love talking about black people only because I'm black, you know what I mean? But I won't because that doesn't really frame everything. But what I meant to say too about my upbringing and my friends and all this stuff is that black for me has a very specific definition. Okay? And thus a black consciousness and a black worldview has a very specific definition. So when I run into like folks and colleagues and comrades, they're like, yeah, man, black is so many things. I'm like, yeah, I guess it is so many things, but to me it means these things right here, you know what I mean? So if you think about it, basically, and so when I say black, please, y'all came, so I would assume no one is in here to like shoot me, but I cannot assume that. So just know that I am ready if you want to get down, wherever it is. But obviously I don't have a bulletproof, so I know whoever it is, like, he ain't that ready, right? So, so I'm going to assume that I'm kind of speaking to the choir here, but black for me, a black perspective is one that is concerned for the humanization of all peoples facing oppression, whether it's internalized oppression or a targeted external force. enacting some type of oppressive system upon you, okay? Standing in alliance with all those folks, regardless of ethnicity or nationality, in order to topple major systems, mechanisms, and confront ideologies of oppression, okay? For me, that's what black is to me, okay? It's an appreciation of culture that comes out of a beautiful ethnic-based history, but that ethnic does not mean people of color. Okay, that just predates these large, as Dr. John Brown Childs called them, large, broad unit categories of white, black, Asian. Okay, within all those things are these beautiful ethnicities. And to me, black is something that was developed as a unifying term to bring all these folks of the diaspora together, along with folks on the continent, within a political ideology that says, no, people must be liberated over all concerns of state domination. You also have this dynamic of looking at whiteness as well, as whiteness as a construct to unite people of European descent that were historically oppressed as their ethnicities against people of color. Okay, so there's a celebration in a black perspective of, in my opinion, of course, of an Irish ethnic heritage, of a Russian ethnic heritage, of a German ethnic heritage, because those are people that have created culture over many, many generations, okay? Whiteness as a construct, this main cultural identifier is dominance, is wealth, is oppression. Doesn't really have a food, doesn't really have a location. It's a construct. And it is about unifying, but not a unifying in a sense of beauty as much as a unifying for the purposes of hate and exclusion, okay? So my construction